Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, one of the things that I myself have been doing here lately, and those who follow me on various networks may have noticed, is I have been doing a lot of other people's podcasts, discussing some things about business, some things about our podcast, trying to promote it. And one of the things that was a pretty common thread that I think that by me doing this podcast with you all the time, I have almost become numb to in a way, is that for many people, moral conversations and conversations about God in general are uncomfortable. And there's, for whatever reason, a barrier there. And I'm not totally sure why. I have some guesses, but they're not really scientifically based by any long-term process. But the number one thing I think about is it's almost like feels like it's a muscle that people don't use. So if you haven't done somersaults since you were 4 years old, you don't see a whole lot of 50-year-olds just doing a somersault down the street. Like, it's not accustomed to them. So I think that that's part of that. And like I said, we discuss a podcast about God. We record it all the time. So for me, it's not quite something that I'm used to, but I have found that for a lot of people that I've been talking to, kind of branching out of my, little network bubble, trying to get to other people, is seeing that this is something that is common with a lot of people. You just find a little uncomfortable to talk about it. And also, I was at a wedding that was of a different religion. Actually, not even totally sure what religion it was, but it felt very different than our mass. And this, I think, is another part of it, because I've always had this type of feeling, and I wish I knew which kind it was. But it almost felt that the preacher up there was continually trying to go out of his way to be, in my world, what would be an aggressive salesman, in almost forcing people to always be on him with every point along the way. And I do not get that feeling going from the mass. From the mass, I get the feeling that we're, 90% of the mass is quoting from scripture in one format or another. So it's a very different feeling. And I know myself, I don't do high pressure sales. I don't try to force people to agree with me. I actually think that it's easier to do sales when someone disagrees with me, as counterintuitive as that is. So those were the two kind of pillars I was thinking about, like, why would this be uncomfortable for people to talk about God? And the first one being they just haven't done it in a while, and the second one being they don't want to be pressure sale, which is common in every person I've met, regardless of the topic. So I wanted to just kind of use this episode to kind of just break the ice, kind of try to examine this, and maybe in the examination of it, we'd be able to help some people along the way to get a better relationship with God and maybe talk to Him again for the first time in forever.
That's a great topic, Joe. Thanks for raising the point. And I, like you, haven't done a scientific study of this. I can just muse about some things that I think often make it difficult. And there's I don't know where it comes from, but I've heard for a long time, don't talk about politics and religion in polite company.
Yeah.
And the idea being, I think, that those two things tend to have strong opinions, and there's a necessary diversity. So, you don't have fervent arguments about whether 2 + 2 = 4, and other things that don't matter as much, like whether you should separate a participle or not. English grammar is also not often a fighting point with people. And so there are things that may have diverse opinions, but are not particularly deep and meaningful to most people. There are other things that just have an actual answer, Russia was founded on a particular date. There are so many countries in the world. The word in English that means this. The answers to Trivial Pursuit questions. So there are a lot of things that have concrete answers, and so they're also not things that we would end up sort of fighting over. Religion is and politics are also not unrelated, but those are things that people can have very strong and very different opinions over. And when we get into the space of strong and different opinions, then it's a risk to express my opinion, first of all, because you could shoot it down. And you might have thought about your opinion quite a bit more than I've thought about my opinion. And so when I say, I think that federal taxes are a terrible idea, that has been the downfall of this country, and we should, the 17th Amendment or whatever it was the worst decision of Congress, and that really led things down the tubes. And you go, I couldn't disagree with you more, and so I already posted that opinion in kind of an aggressive way, and we do that too because we're afraid of being hurt. So let me shift that into a religious space and say, if I said to you, Jesus Christ is the most important part of my life, and I think that he is the answer to every human heart, and he's the answer to all our questions, and he is the fulfillment of our lives. Now that's very precious truth to me. And you might think that's complete hogwash, and you're not afraid to say so. Because there's nothing in the matters of faith that there's no way to prove it. That's what makes it faith. There's no way to disprove it either, and that's really important. But we can't prove it. We can give evidence, we can back up our claims, we can give personal testimony, we can point to things in history, we can give a lot of things, but we can't ultimately prove it in the way that we can prove that, China is on the other side of the world or something. There are other points that we can make more definitively. So when I say something, now religion tends to be very precious to us. I mean, it cuts very deep. It's really at the foundation. Ultimately, it's the foundation of our life. We build our lives on worship, whether we're doing it intentionally or not. But certainly if we're following a particular religion, it just goes all through us. And so for me to take the risk of expressing my religious beliefs, which I cannot prove, even if you can't disprove them, you can fight them or dismiss them. And then I feel very wounded by that. So it's very vulnerable to talk about religion. And often it's very vulnerable to talk about politics, at least the kind of politics that really touches our flesh. We could talk about the politics of immigration, but if we don't know anybody who's involved in immigration, it may be a degree more abstract and we can just kind of debate over these things. But when it's like, my mother is, has a green card or something and is in danger of getting deported, like it becomes a really personal discussion. And so that's that kind of vulnerability is hard about any subject that's so vulnerable. But then I think I would propose that a problem in our day is that we've really lost the ability to disagree in civil terms, and to disagree even with fervor and conviction, but in a way that really loves and respects the person I'm disagreeing with. And I think back to Chesterton, and I always forget who he had a regular interlocutor, another person who made proposals that he disagreed with, Robert Shaw, maybe something like that. Anyway, and he would quote him, and Russell Shaw, that's right, Russell Shaw, and he would quote him and disagree with him, but they were best friends. So if you just read like Orthodoxy, Chesterton's work Orthodoxy, you'd think, oh man, he like tears this guy apart. He totally dismantles all his arguments. Yeah, but they were also best friends. They'd go out for a beer afterward and they'd spend time together. And that's the thing that we've really lost the capacity for.
Mm-hmm.
I think we see it in, I'm not involved in Congress directly, obviously, but I hear stories about the inability to just have conversations across the aisle, that after debating fervently about some point, the guys can go out and get a beer together and just be human together and talk with each other. That we've we've really created such a rift between differing points of view on subjects that legitimately have differing points of view, uh, which religion does and politics do, that we've lost the ability to have the kinds of conversations that you're describing, where I can share my faith and I can let somebody else share their faith, and we can start by trying to understand each other rather than starting by disagreeing and tearing each other down.
And what a beautiful point there. Yeah, that's certainly. I think it's what you said there in the beginning. It's a fear of being vulnerable. It's a fear of being exposed and hurt. So I think that all of us somewhere inside of us have the I'd rather just avoid pain than forcing through it, because as you said there, it can't be proven. So the thought process could be, well, what's the upside? And the upside is what I think the goal of this podcast has been the whole time, has been to show the actual practical applications of having a faith life, what it does for you. We've recorded what for 7 or 5 since 2017. So for 5 years now, I don't think I've ever once seen you like horrifically angry. I've seen you mad about something stupid I've said, um, but I've never seen you horrifically angry. And I think that there's just a great centering that happens through living essentially the virtues as we've discussed it. Especially with in my mind temperance. I think that's the one that I was the worst at when we were going through the virtue series. Whenever we did a couple of years ago, um, particularly on the humility side, and the way that I've been pushing myself through there has been through fasting. That was one of the ways of strengthening that virtue. And then it's amazing how all the sub virtues kind of got better too. Patience kind of became a little easier because I was used to tolerating pain because I was hungry. And then it became, well, I can tolerate this. Maybe it's a little bit easier not to get upset the first time that something doesn't go my way. And then, does it give me the courage to speak out? That being its own complete different, virtue there. And then to learn more, that's, reading books about saints, as you said, reading the Bible, having conversations about it. That's all, prudence and important of getting better. And I think about this, and these are all things that at the end of the day, we kind of want our children to be. We don't want our children to freak out the first time they don't get what they want. I'm at the point now where Joey is doing that. You take a toy away from him, he just loses his mind. And do I want him to be like that his whole life? No. That's a fact. Now, can he talk yet? Can he say prayers yet? No, but we can say them with him, around him, to try to start this base. Do I want him to become smarter? Yes. Do I want him to be willing to speak up when he sees something that, he doesn't think is right? Yes, of course I want all this. And then the stem of all this is I want him to have faith, at the end of the day. So to me, that's the part. Like people are afraid to tell someone you're doing it wrong. And I think that becomes so personal that I don't want to be told I'm doing it wrong. And then at the same time, there's also this, I don't know what the right word is, guilt, pit in your stomach, when you know something isn't right and you feel it's because of something you did. But when it's something you're not doing, it's very hard to detect. I've seen this a lot because I buy houses from estates a lot, where, the daughter will be selling the house to me and she'll be showing me around, her mom's house or her grandma's house and what be it. And she'll be like, something's different about this room. I don't know what it is, but there's something different about it. And it'll be that, someone took away some couch or some clock or something that's not there. But as human nature, we have a hard time detecting what we're missing. But we can feel it inside of us. It just feels like something's off. And I think that talking about religion to some people is an indication of that there's something that's off. And I don't know how to fix it, but I just know something's wrong. And normally you don't even know the cause. You just know something's wrong. So to me, I wanted to kind of discuss that because I think that that's something we we live with a lot.
Yeah, that's really well said. I like that comparison of feeling something is wrong without being able to put your finger on it and name it. And we are missing a lot of things. And certainly a religious practice is one of them for a lot of people. So, how do we get here? Religion has done itself no favors in a lot of ways. I mean, religious figures, religious leaders have a lot of power and have used that power in bad ways. The sex abuse crisis is obviously a particularly horrible expression of it, but the abuse of power in moving people rather than addressing problems, covering things up rather than dealing with things, but also the power in like shaming people into certain behaviors. And the pastor can rant and rave up at the front of the church, and it becomes a bully pulpit that nobody can say anything back to him. And there's a whole cast of sensitive people who develop guilt neuroses around that. And there's a whole cast of angry people who, in former days, because the social pressure was so strong to go to church, they found a way to go to church and check out and be angry about it. Now they just walk out. People just aren't going to deal with that. And it's the social pressure around participating in religion has relaxed significantly. There's no shame that people feel around not going to church on Sundays anymore, for the most part. And so it's made it a lot easier to just walk out, to stop coming, to lose a sense of purpose. And so it's a much greater challenge for us to evangelize, to tell people there's a reason for this, and it's not just because your mother did it or because that's what polite people do. There's a reason in terms of your eternal salvation. There's even a reason in terms of your human thriving, that it really makes a difference. But we have to kind of make the case and witness to the case. And then we also have to stop abusing religious authority. It's tempting to say heavy-handed things in order to force somebody else to do something. And you will find ways to both take away the toy from Joey and also love him such that he isn't losing his mind, because his whole life was dependent on that toy, and understands that you're anyway what all of this stuff is there. But you have to kind of figure out what his distress is too. Is it just about the toy, or is there something else, some other meaning attached to that particular toy? Or the fact that you're taking it away from him, he's experiencing some form of rejection from you, and that's actually the most painful thing. So there's always subtleties in these different behaviors, and we're always trying to kind of put the right model on the right situation. So as religious leaders, we have to be sensitive to where people are, why they came and why they walked away, and why they ought to come back again. And that starts with discussions, which, as you point out, we're not great at. We don't have a good culture around it, and there tends to be a bit of resistance to it. And I have to. I live in this kind of odd space. I mean, I'm dressed in a religious habit, and I'm never not dressed in it. And so I'm proclaiming to everybody that I'm a religious person, and I'm still uncomfortable bringing up these subjects. So it's there really is such a heavy social pressure against it, because people are uncomfortable. I'm sensitive to other people's discomfort, and so I don't want to just say, "Hey, what religion are you?" Nor do I want to just start spouting off about, doing the hard sell, like you said. Brother, do you believe in Jesus? I got to tell you about, and those kinds of things turn me off a little bit. Although,
Yeah.
I maybe they shouldn't, and I need to, develop. We all need to develop our own way of bringing up these subjects. I think that's one takeaway is there are polite ways to ask things, and I've started to do it a little bit more, like in a restaurant. Somebody comes up to me, and I have a long beard and I have a long black habit, and they'll say, I'm just really interested in, like, what does this mean? And I love that they asked, and I'll say, well, I'm a Roman Catholic priest and also a Benedictine monk. And then I'll turn it right around and say, what are you? Do you go to a church? No, so those are just little ways, and I had to kind of learn that over time. I would look for opportunities to witness without asking anything from them. But the fact is, people are more willing to share something if they know that you're going to receive it in an open way. And I'm genuinely curious, and I say it in that way to them. Tell me about yourself. Do you go to a church? And I say it just with that tone of voice, and that doesn't sound threatening. And so, anyway, I think all of us can find ways to raise the topic of religion and share our own religious beliefs. And if we're uncomfortable or uncertain what our religious beliefs are, probably it's good to figure that out. That would be another takeaway. And find some ways to do that.
And what a perfect note to end today's episode on. So we hope that this kind of opens up the gap, make it easier to have a conversation with someone, probably someone who's close to you. Is probably the easiest person to go to, someone who is already already accepting to you. And, if they've walked away or distanced themselves for whatever reason, just kind of try, practice. It's easier to practice on people than people you don't. So that's just a fact of life. So hopefully this, like I said, we hope that this helps everyone. And one of the ways that you can do that is by helping to share us and help us grow. So you can hit that with any share button, and regardless of which podcast app you're listening to us in. And we thank you for helping us in advance. So thank you guys very much, and we'll be with you again next week.